By the way, an estimated 100,000 Iraqis have been killed in this war since the invasion in 2003. Tom Andrews is the national director of Win Without War, and Tony Blankley's a conservative. Well, he's just a conservative. He's also a syndicated columnist and author of the new book, American Grit. You should get that book. We should come on and talk about that book. Here's President Bush last night on the reason for us going to war in Iraq.
The battles waged by our troops are part of a broader struggle between two dramatically different systems. Under one, a small band of fanatics demands total obedience to an oppressive ideology, condemns women to subservience, and marks unbelievers for murder. The other system is based on the conviction that freedom is the universal gift of Almighty God, and that liberty and justice light the path to peace. And in the long run, advancing this belief is the only practical way to protect our citizens. When people live in freedom, they do not willingly choose leaders who pursue campaigns of terror.
Tony, is this why we went to war in Iraq?
Well, look, as you know, there were a lot of reasons that Bush mentioned. Weapons of mass destruction. He gave the speech at AEI on democracy. I think most of the public thought we went because of weapons of mass destruction, not to do democracy, although he did list all of those reasons.
Well, let's take a look before time gets in here. Let's take a look. Here's President Bush laying out the case for war back in 2002.
Some ask how urgent this danger is to America and the world. The danger is already significant, and it only grows worse with time. If we know Saddam Hussein has dangerous weapons today, and we do, does it make any sense for the world to wait to confront him as he grows even stronger and develops even more dangerous weapons?
And here the president is at his final press conference this week talking about that WMD issue in Iraq.
There have been disappointments. Abu Ghraib obviously was a huge disappointment during the presidency. Not having weapons of mass destruction was a significant disappointment. I don't know if you want to call those mistakes or not, but things didn't go according to plan, let's put it that way.
What do you make of that, Tom?
You know, the irony here, the bitter irony, Chris, is the very principles and values that the president said that he was defending and promoting in this war, he subverted systematically. He deceived the American public. This was not just a matter of bad intelligence. There was an operation within the White House called the White House Iraq Group that was designed to systematically take bits of information, manipulate them, poll the American people, find out what was going to scare the American people the most, and then feed them what the White House knew to be untrue information that would lead the American people into believing that an attack was fully justified.
Why?
Why? Because
why'd they do it?
Why? Because you had a group of people that the administration basically gave the steering wheel of the White House and the country to, called these neocons, who had a preordained power agenda that they wanted to fulfill, and they saw 9/11 as a vehicle to put that plan into effect. It was a radical plan. It was nonsensical. It was outrageous, but they saw this as an opportunity to do it, and of course, the president just gave him the wheel.
I found it interesting the president, who admitted he was wrong about WMD as a justification for war, called it a disappointment. If a police officer in the line of duty in the middle of the night shoots a fellow because he thinks he's got a gun, it turns out he's got a wallet. Your reaction, if you're a police officer, is not that you're disappointed he didn't have a gun. It's shame that even if it was a technical mistake you made, that you killed a guy without reason. Why does the president use the word disappointment when he says they didn't have the WMD that justified us going in? I think it's an odd use of the word.
It is, but I think, as you know, I think every politician knows that there's a gotcha game if you make mistakes. Now, I think he's got to the point where he can probably do it because he's out of office in 5 days. But if you say, I made a mistake, then that becomes a headline. I do want to just briefly contest one of many of your points, that the president knowingly misstated facts to the public. Clearly, facts were mistaken, but there's a difference between being mistaken and intentionally doing a lie. I don't mean, it's an old debate.
This is important because he's trying to recreate history here. He quoted a UN report that never existed. He quoted a defector who said absolutely the opposite of what he actually said. One of my
What about the 16 words about the nuclear arms, nuclear purchases out of Africa?
My favorite was
an old debate, but in fact, the British continue to believe in the yellow cake.
My favorite was he told the American public that Saddam Hussein had the capability of taking a drone, putting biological weapons onto it, and flying it, launching it off the East Coast and flying it down the coast, killing millions of Americans.
Right.
Now, he had in his possession, now we now know, he had in his possession a U.S. Air Force report that documented that was completely impossible. He had no such capability, nor would he have such capability. But he went on the air telling the American people something he knew was untrue.
Why did he build this picture in our minds of some balsa wood plane coming from Iraq carrying, even in one case, nuclear weapons? Why did he build that picture in our minds? So that the American people thought that Saddam Hussein was a strategic threat to the United States?
Yeah,
why did he do it?
Let me say,
if he did it by accident, why did he do it?
We're talking about the legacy of the war, and we're now debating causes and arguments for it rather than effects of it.
How about reasons for it?
I mean, let me give you an example. Civil War was fought not to end slavery, but it was fought to save the Union. Its effect, its legacy, was to free the slaves. I think it's an interesting discussion to revamp over and over again all the things that was said 5 years ago.
Fought over expansion of slavery into the territories. At least it was fought over slavery.
But the question of the legacy is, are we going to be better off 5, 10, 20 years from now for this war or not? I think that's an open debate, but it's a more interesting one than haggling over whether George Bush was given some false information, 6 years ago.
Should a president of the United States lie to the American people? Should a president of the United States engage in the systematic deception of the American people? That's what the point is.
Your morality here. What? If a cop shoots a guy by accident because he thinks he's armed, which is a good metaphor for this, you think the bad guy's armed, and you say, well, even if he wasn't armed, at least he never got to shoot anybody again, so it's justified 10 years later.
No, that's not.
That's an incredible moral argument.
No, it's not, and I'm not making that argument. We are supposed to be discussing the legacy, the consequences of the Bush presidency, and the consequences of the Bush presidency will be defined centrally by whether Iraq war ends up being good for America or bad for America. We haven't had that debate.
How would you judge it positively? How would that turn out?
If we don't know yet.
Well, tell me how it would look.
If in fact Iraq ends up being a benign, non-radical, at least neutral or friendly to the West country, and that ends up reducing radicalism and tyranny in the Middle East, then probably fighting the war 50 years from now will look like a good decision. If, on the other hand, as could still be the case, you have Sunnis and Shias fighting and they suck the other countries in, and we have a holocaust of fighting in the Middle East, it'll be a disaster. That's the interesting question. Which way does it go?
So all those British wars in the Middle East that were propping up monarchies in the British model, if it turned out that those monarchies had lasted in Iraq and Syria and places like that, then the British Empire would have been justified.
Nothing.
Well, that's what you're arguing.
I think the British Empire was justified. I think India benefited. There's a better country because they have traditions of democracy and the common law. Do you think India is better off than countries that didn't receive the law?
I'm talking about the Middle East.
Look, nothing lasts forever, but I think that you can make an argument.
Do you think there's a good bet that Iraq is going to turn out to be a stable democracy? That's a good bet.
And think about...
I want to, Tony, just for a second.
I would bet...
That's a good bet. It's worth 100,000 dead Iraqis.
No, I would bet it at about 50-50. And if that's the case, and if history unfolds, the Middle East becomes more benign because of that, we can have a nuclear war out of the Middle East, and at any point, as you know, but with the weapons building up. So if that resulted that way, then it was a bet worth taking.
Can I put you another case?
Sure.
That's your argument. I'm sorry. But if we had left Iraq in place and there'd been a buffer to Iran, Israel would not be threatened by an unchecked Iran right now.
No, because Iranian missiles can fly over Iraq.
But Iraq was a buffer and a challenge to Iran that now does not have a challenge and a buffer to it.
There's no doubt that...
We removed the biggest threat to Iran, Iraq.
There's no doubt
brilliant?
Wait a sec. We don't know how this story is going to play out yet. If Iran doesn't develop... I think mostly liberals argue that Iran is not a country that is impossible of being integrated into society. That's why we reach for people who are not the crazies in Iran. That's the argument for why we shouldn't bomb Iran that I hear from my liberal friends, is that Iran can be integrated, that they do have an interest in being engaged in the West.
Right. And we've undermined them. We've undermined them by declaring them the axis of evil, by asking them for help in Afghanistan, where the actual attack on this country started. Okay, now hold on, Tony, just listen. They supported our attempt to to stop the people that came into our country and attacked us. The Iran supported us. A week or so after they supported us and enabled us to be victorious in that first wave of Afghanistan and getting the Taliban out, we rewarded them by declaring them the axis of evil. We took our eyes off the ball, the real people who had attacked us, and instead we put those ideological blinders on that the neocons provided this country and went after a country that was no threat whatsoever to the United States, killed thousands of our soldiers, hundreds of thousands of innocent Iraqis, and put this country in the disaster that
that is the debate of 2003, reiterated.
For what you now call a 50-50 bet.
I think it's a 50-50 bet.
100,000 people dead, 4,000 American service people dead, families missing servicemen for a 50-50 bet.
Well, was World War II worth it?
Well, it wasn't a 50-50 bet. We got rid of Hitler, and that was good.
Well, we didn't know at the beginning. When my old country, England, started, they didn't know they were going to win. They lost London lost 40,000 people in the Blitz alone. Okay. Was it worth it? Yeah, to beat Hitler.
Okay, you know what? It turned out that Roosevelt was right. The Japanese did attack Pearl Harbor. It turned out that George Bush was wrong. Saddam Hussein did not have WMD. Thank you, Tony. Don't ever go with the metaphors. They're trouble. Tony Blankley, I want your book on when you come on. Tony, thank you for that abuse you just had to take. Tony, and being on the wrong side of the issue here. Tony Blankley, Tom Ed Andrews, thank you. Former Congressman from Maine.